Hello. Welcome to The Play That Changed My Life. I'm Patrick White, a co-founder of Harbinger Theatre, and welcome to our podcast, which is all a very elaborate way of me having more theater in my life. We're going to have a great theater conversation with two of my favorite theater makers in the capital region. That's right. So join us. Today we have Laura Darling, who is directing a new production by Lauren Gunderson called The Half-Life of Marie Curie, and Michael Kennedy, who is writing, directing, and performing in Creative Action Unlimited's Michael and Steve Talk About the End of Life as They Know It. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for having us.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, this is just another excuse for me to have more theater conversation in my life.
We had to interrupt the previous theater conversation to have this
That's
theater
right.
conversation.
That's right.
And when we're done, we'll have the next conversation about
That's right. You know, I had sort of like this worry, like, oh, don't talk so much before we start taping. You're gonna waste all the good conversation. But no, we have plenty more conversation to go.
probably.
Yeah. So big weekend. We had a fundraiser at the Fort Orange Distillery.
Fort Orange Brewing Company, Creative Action Unlimited, did a cornhole tournament soup competition fundraiser yesterday.
Doesn't that
was
sound good?
unusual. Yeah.
Cornhole
Great
soup.
soup.
What's soup one?
What? Well, different soups won in different. There were categories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know that my soup didn't win anything. That's, and also I'd never seen anyone play cornhole, which is apparently a thing.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Ethan Remmert.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. It was a great time. I only had 4 of the soups out of 12. But I had a great time, great conversation with Michael and all the great people at Creative Action Unlimited who I haven't seen Fred in a while. So that was awesome. Laura, what did you do this weekend?
It was my sister's birthday party, and so she asked that we all go to see Taylor Swift at the AMC theaters. And so I made a bunch of friendship bracelets, even though I'm not a Swiftie, to go and support.
You are now.
According to
You
her, I
are
am.
now.
And it was a lot of fun seeing like a lot of the younger kids and the good feminine sisterhood energy that was.
Yeah, that's
so
theater.
That's what I did this weekend.
That's theater.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was an interesting moment when the kids decided that they were sitting in the seats versus when they decided they were no longer going to sit in the seats. And that decision-making process you could watch from 4 rows back when the spirit moved them. That was interesting.
So move them to
Get up from their
dance?
seats and go down to the front of the theater and dance like it was a concert.
Oh,
or a
yeah.
movie.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
a very
yeah.
interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw something about that.
It's true.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's fantastic. You know, dancing at a movie, that is theater.
It really was.
You know, it's funny, 518 Theater Artists, the Facebook event page, and people submit things that they're doing, and I approve or, decline. But I approve everything. But they're like, this is theater adjacent, and people send in, they're doing a haunt. I've been getting a lot of wrestling events. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Theater.
I think a lot of things are theater that we don't tend to think about. You put on costumes and a persona and you go out into the world. I mean, heck, sometimes I think work is theater. Put on like the professional face and go in and smile at people, even if I don't want to. That's theater too.
Yeah, Chris and I count the number of productions that we see a year, and it's what counts. Does this count as theater? And a lot of times we get into little debates, like it's usually a concert, it's like Kelly O'Hara or Uda Lemper, and the Uda Lemper very definitely had a script, so we were like,
That's theater.
That counts.
That's theater. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. There's a lot of stuff going on in the capital region. It's, I just made plans for the next weekend. It's just
Trying to fit them all in.
very exciting. Very exciting. Leaves changing, and half a dozen plays are in the capital region.
Always.
Yeah.
Always lately. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So I wanted to talk about the times we're living in, and I saw there was an announcement. And, everyone's talking about theater, and the topic of theater and COVID, usually lately, we were talking about some audience behavior issues, but also there have been some closures, and I think nationally more than locally, although there have been some companies locally that have closed or cut back. But I wanted to talk about creativity in COVID, and I think I have two exceptional guests to address this topic, and I actually thought about it because of the two of you. And what I mean by creativity in the time of COVID is what we've had to deal with to get to do our art in the times that we are now living in, as far as preparation, as far as what we choose to do, and how it's affected everything about how we make theater.
Absolutely. I know that when COVID first hit, all of us scrambled of how can we keep going on, what can we do, and a lot of us resorted to the Zoom readings or the Zoom theater. I know myself, I wrote COVID Pocus or Quarantine's a Witch, that was about the 4 witches of McBee getting together on a Zoom call instead of meeting together in a coven meeting because of it. So, there was some creativity that came out of it, forcing theater to adapt. That was fun, but I definitely missed going to live theater and would wear a mask if I had to see a show still. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It happened on a Thursday. I remember, I think I went to the Irish and How They Got That Way at the Rep, last performance in the Rep's old home on North Pearl Street. And I tried to get folks to come over to the apartment Friday to do a play reading, and I couldn't get any takers. But I had class on Saturday, but that was it.
Yeah, it happened so fast, right? Over the course of a couple of days, everything had to shift. We did some work on Zoom. It just, for me, it was that was really challenging because so much of theater is the live aspect. It's the energy in the room. And in Zoom, there's no energy in the room. It's that immediately it takes that piece away. It's the same reason I don't like to have people film or videotape a stage production, because that energy doesn't come through, in my opinion, on a videotape. So,
well, it wasn't built.
No, it's not built for that, right?
For that screen.
So we can see it. Yeah. But we can't feel it in the same way that we can when we're sitting in a theater.
To me, it always reminds me of, like, a film performance. It always reminds me of, like, watching, a robbery on a Burger King camera.
Yeah.
It is like that.
Like you're in watching from overhead some. And there are very good captures, and I love Lincoln Center, the library of film and tape. They have like every show that's been on Broadway back 40 years, and you can go up there just with a library card and just say, I want to see the Statesboro Boys, and they call it up, and you sit down, watch it. It's like incredible, but it's not
quite the same.
It's not quite the real thing.
Right.
But.
And we all had those experiences. And I remember Quarantine's a Witch, and I think I participated in a creative action Zoom workshop. But those were very specific reactions or ways to work in the pandemic. And I'm curious about lately, how has it changed, like we've all been doing theater for a long time, but it's different, right?
It is. I think
different.
there's a unspoken fear sometimes, especially among the actors, that you work so hard to get so far, and then the moment someone starts to have a sniffle backstage, it's almost like they don't want to say the word, they don't want to ask the question, but it's the responsible thing to say. No, we have to test, we have to be careful, we have to maintain precautions. I know when I directed Seminar right after the pandemic lifted, Seminar called for a bunch of making out of almost everybody with everybody else, and I nixed almost all of it because I said, if one person goes down, the whole show goes down. And I think I lost sight of that a little bit with Bull in a China Shop, and that's what happened. Even though there was no kissing in Bull in a China Shop, I had one actor got COVID, and then another, and another, and another, and then we had to close the second weekend and cancel the entire production because in the end, 5 different people got COVID, and the others were not comfortable performing with either people on book or with masks on stage.
I'm so sorry.
And it's still a reality of our time that we did all that work and we got one great weekend out of it. And then it got pulled. It's still here.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think for us at the beginning of COVID, we were in rehearsal for what we thought was going to be a stage production, and we decided to transition to film, which I had very little experience with, but luckily I was surrounded by people who did know more about it. So that was Shelter, and that was our first film, and then there was already a push for Whitewash the Racism Project to become a film. So
it was an amazing
yeah, thank you. But when it was brought up to me when we were performing on stage pre-COVID that this should be a film, I just kept saying, I'm booking the show on stage. Like, that's what I know how to do. And I think if it hadn't been for COVID, we never would have made that film. Because I'm so stage oriented.
Yep.
Yeah. It was not a comfort zone for me. But now we have 4 films. And when we were able to return to stage, recently it's been a concern. We have a show opening in less than 2 weeks, and the most I can do as a director and producer is to ask actors to be really careful, be mindful when you're going out in public like this. If you're not right now wearing a mask, now would be the time to start wearing a mask so that not that we can prevent it, but so we decrease the possibility that we have to cancel performances. So much work goes into it. And I know when I saw, Laura's show having to cancel the second weekend, like, I really feel that, because it is a fear that lives, I think, maybe more for us as directors than for the actors, because we've been working on it in such a big way for so long. But of course, it impacts the actors too. It's a huge investment in time and energy.
Right.
Which is why I was really concerned with Half-Life of Marie Curie, because it only has 2 actresses. Right. And knowing that, and knowing how near and dear the script is to my heart, and how much I wanted to do this project since the moment I saw it off Broadway, I decided to ask the ACT board to allow me to cast actual understudies, and it's a new thing that they hadn't really done that before. So I asked specifically, guarantee them at least 1 performance. So we'll pick a night, and it'll be the understudy performance. And if no one ever gets sick and no one ever gets COVID, they still get a guaranteed performance. And if someone does, the show can go on. And I made it very clear when casting the understudies that they are part of the full cast. They got to come to the table read. They read at the read-through as well. I consider them full cast members because they're going to do all the work too. And I think that for smaller shows, it's wise to have dedicated understudies, but it is a thankless job. You do a lot of sitting around, a lot of watching, and a lot of hard work with a very small possibility of seeing stage time. But I think that might be the wave of the future for community theaters, even if it's just, okay, you're the dedicated stage manager, so you're going to learn this part and that part, or we'll be seeing more books on stage, and we're going to have to further suspend our disbelief as audience members and be okay with it.
Yeah, well, we've already, I think, seen that.
Oh, yeah.
There are a number of different, performances that have had to go on with books and things like that. And people pitching in, and there was a Pirates of Penzance, and Frederick disappeared at intermission, and they kind of had to come up with another story that Gilbert and Sullivan didn't necessarily write. You said something about Bull in a China Shop about actors not being comfortable with people on book.
Yes.
Yeah.
At that time, we had 12 people on, so it was a 12-person cast. And at that time, it would have been 7 books on stage.
Wow.
I see that.
And so for the remainder of the people thinking, well, we all have been kind of exposed, and while we waited, we canceled 2 performances to give us some buffer time from the last time we all met to the Friday performance to see who tested positive and who tested negative, and then we were safe to perform. But I would have had to find 7 people to put scripts in their hands essentially to go on that night, and the books would have outnumbered the actors. And at that point, they said, what are we doing?
I see that.
And I said, I will stand with what you want. You have worked so hard to do this, but at what point does it become almost ridiculous and unsafe because you're going to have 7 people on stage who don't really know the blocking, and what kind of art is that if it's just to get through? And we had to make a really tough call, but the Schenectady Civic Board stood by me the entire time and said, whatever you feel is best for the cast and crew, and that was the call we had to make.
Yeah. We had a production, the immediate predecessor to Harbinger, of Death Tax by Lucas Nath, and we lost, it was only a cast of 4, and lost one of the actors before we opened. And we went on with people on book for the first weekend, and I actually, we got a great review of someone on book, Sarah Papini, who can read like no one else. I say she is the best reader in the Capital Region. But we got a review and extolling her performance, and hoping that we went on for a second weekend. But I kind of felt like this is not what we rehearsed. This is not, it was a representation, but I just didn't feel comfortable presenting that as
the final finish. You intended.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not what we rehearsed, but it's what came out at the end. And there's something to be said for that being part of art and live theater, rolling with the punches. But as a director, you work really hard to make a specific vision of the world, and you really want that one to be the one that the audience sees and again can see your vision and your thoughts.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that, but I also think it's never exactly what my vision was anyway.
That's so true.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's okay, that's close. Okay, that's even closer. That's great. But there'll always be that aspect of this is not completely what I imagined. Sometimes it's better than what I imagined.
That is so true.
That I couldn't have predicted. I think audiences are generally pretty generous about seeing somebody on stage on book. I think for those of us who have performed at places like Theater Voices, where everybody's on book and it's a stage reading, I certainly learned how fast the audience forgets that you're on book, depending on how you hold the script in your hand and depending on how you maneuver around the stage. So I'm okay with having someone have to be on book. It was a little harder in our last production where we had an actor who had to wear a mask on stage, and that's really hard for the actor because she rehearsed it a certain way, and so much of what you see on stage has to do with people's faces, and now her face is covered, and her voice is a little muffled, and so that was very challenging for her, and it was difficult for me and the audience watching it, knowing, what it looks like with somebody without a mask. But if the choice is to cancel the performance or to go on, then I'm going to go on as long as everybody's safe. And we have had stage managers step into open roles and those stage managers have done an incredible job. But yes, it's never ideal.
Yeah.
And it is always a concern now as my show gets closer, and we've worked on it for 6 months. It's such a concern. Like, are we actually going to be able to perform or not in the end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Harbinger had its first read-through last night of Mrs. Packard by Emily Mann, and Chris is directing it, Chris Foster. And he recruited me to read Dr. McFarlane because an actor is coming out of COVID. He's on his final days, tested negative this morning. So I stepped in at the first read-through, and this is a cast of 16. And it gave Chris an opportunity to give a little COVID speech. But yeah, it kind of, it's a different sort of kickoff.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone.
You go into a theater and you have to give these are our safety rules, and this is what I expect of you out of the production, and this is when rehearsal's going to be, and oh, by the way, here's our COVID protocol. It's now part of the regular theater vernacular.
Right.
It's also just part of it's part of our lives now.
Yeah.
And so I think there was this maybe naive hope for those couple of years that we would get, I don't know. People kept saying back to normal, and I thought, I don't think so. And so what is the new normal, and how careful do we need to be? And I don't, as a producer, I'm asked, well, what's your COVID protocol now? And what about now? And we're constantly having to revise based on CDC guidelines and what we think is really safe. And it's another whole layer to the work. The work is already overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think another kind of victim of the COVID era is that when theaters were able to open and we were trying to go back to this new normal, in Capital Region community theater, not everybody came back. They might come back to clap in the audience, but we lost a lot of techies, a lot of those tried and true people who would come out and be supportive in either smaller roles or with costumes and lights. A lot of people said, my couch was more comfortable, or I was doing a lot of work and I finally realized it when I slowed down. Yeah. Or they just realized I found other things that interest me more or are more fulfilling than theater. I mean, I don't know what those are personally, but they took kudos to them for finding it. And they didn't really come back in force. And I know that some of the theaters that I work with are still having problems filling some of those roles because not everybody came back.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you find they have a problem finding techies and stuff too?
Oh yeah, I mean, tech folks are really
always an issue.
Yes, we have the tech people that are working in the area are phenomenal. Be great if there were about 10 times that many.
I agree.
Yeah, and you see how busy they are.
So busy.
It's like incredible. I saw something recently about ticket insurance, and it was local. I've seen it, for New York City and actually London, which I may have regretted not buying ticket insurance because, if your flight, or whatever, but a local company, and I don't even know if it's them or if it's their ticketing platform that's selling ticket insurance for their show. And I assume it's whether you cancel or they cancel.
Well, I know when we canceled Bull, we spent the first 3 nights of cancellation at the theater greeting people who didn't get the memo and processing their refunds right there. So I don't think theaters are necessarily keeping the money. If they have to cancel, they're giving the refunds out. Yeah. But I can see that if you're a theater patron and you're not feeling well and you think you might have COVID or test positive for COVID, that's your responsibility not to go to the theater that night. And so I think in that instance that would be an excellent way to make sure that you could still get your money back. But a lot of patrons that night, when we told them what happened, redonated their ticket
Yeah.
prices back to the theater, and that was really kind of them.
Yeah.
We have very forgiving patrons in the Capital District.
Yeah, they're wonderful. I think that with us, we would just be inclined. I mean, so we have a ticket price, but I also advertise that if you can't afford our tickets, just shoot me an email. We'll make sure that you can come. And I think if somebody wasn't feeling well, even though, whatever ticketing platform you have says there are no refunds and no exchanges or whatever, I think we've established ourselves in the community as, being dedicated to the folks who come. And so I'm sure that people know if they were not feeling well, they could shoot me an email and they could come the next weekend or the next show or get a refund or whatever it was that they felt like they needed.
That's awesome.
It's more than once called up and said, "Hey, can I switch it to the next weekend?" And I've never had a problem doing that.
Yeah, people are great.
Unless, of course, it's sold out or something.
Right.
But then that's my fault if I couldn't make it. So.
Yeah. I was thinking we had ticket. I usually don't buy these premium. They weren't premium tickets, but they were full price tickets, which feels like premium. To Sweeney Todd, and both Josh Groban and Anna Lee Ashford were out for the performance, and we were down there. And actually, I think we found out that Anna Lee was out while we were in the city, and I kind of felt like, "Do you want to go?" And it was great. The understudy performances. I mean, it was an exceptional Sweeney, and I can't even remember his name. But I was like thinking, but I wouldn't have bought these tickets, and I was sort of like, I have to that's my understudy experience and chalk it up. And
That's
say,
why we're going to declare which weekend or which show specifically is the understudy dedicated performance really early, and then if something happens, we'll try to get the word out as fast as possible about who is going on for who, what weekend, and what nights if something is to happen for Marie Curie. But yeah, we're giving the understudies the second weekend Friday is the dedicated understudy performance. Right. So
I have to say, as an audience member, I would be. I mean, I'm interested in going to see any performance, but I would be particularly interested in going to see the understudy performance because there's an added element
Frisian
of
one time only
danger,
tension kind of thing that I would find interesting as an audience
member. I enjoy understudy performances very much. It's just I'm not sure I would have paid.
Yeah, I wouldn't have paid.
It's not Albany Civic Theater, but someone who's paying, I don't know, $400 for Merrily, and one of the three is out. You're like,
yeah.
How about how has COVID affected? It's so funny, Michael, hearing you talk about the films and Whitewashed, because I know I saw Whitewashed before the pandemic over in Troy. And but I kind of think of Creative Action as being this pandemic company, even though you guys were doing what you're doing beforehand. But it seems like your transition into the pandemic and what you were doing and the way in which you rolled, it just seems like, like you were a pandemic company.
As though we started in the pandemic? We're in our 9th year. So, but yes, I think what happened is that we had been doing a few shows a year, but then Whitewash the Racism Project got a lot of attention, and that was the show that we were doing on stage at the point when COVID hit. So people were like, oh, you exist? It's like, yeah, we have existed for, but it takes a while to get people to be aware. And then the transition to film it did feel like we were rolling with it, and it felt like, okay, well, we're not closing. Yeah. So what do we need to do to adapt, and how, the filming was also potentially dangerous. It still involved getting people in the room together and, plus crew. so it was even more people than would have been on stage. We waited to film Whitewashed for a while, until we felt like, okay, we can do this safely if we do it quickly, and get people in and out, kind of thing. But yes, I think that's the reason why, because we were just starting to get some great attention right before COVID.
Right.
And then, but I can tell you, as a producer sitting alone in the studio for 2 years, right, where nobody was rehearsing anymore, where it was just me, trying to decide what to do, that I really wondered if we were going to make it through it, and how to do this. And and I didn't want to become solely a film production company. So in some ways it was a blessing for us that we were forced into this position of having to figure out how to do films. We did some really cool, great films with some awesome filmmakers in the area. And I started in my first meeting, I knew nothing about film, nothing. And so I got given the name of somebody local, and I had a Zoom meeting with him, and he just kind of stared at me because I was asking the most stupid questions. And I said, so what do I, and he was sort of like, I don't, like maybe you need to talk to some other folks and come back to me. Like I didn't even realize that that the person who's the director of photography doesn't also automatically do the editing. So when he said, I'm a director of photography, but I don't edit. And I said, okay, how do I find an editor? I mean, I was starting from complete scratch.
Yeah.
We did that with Confetti Fest too that year. We videoed him as if we were doing them live on stage, but just videoed them. And then I had to do all of the editing because I couldn't find an editor. And so I learned that software pretty quick in order to adapt.
It's a huge job.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your current projects. Laura, you are directing The Half-Life of Marie Curie by Lauren Gunderson, someone whom you've directed before, and you attended this production down at the Minetta Lane.
Did. It was an amazing production. It starts off with Kate Mulgrew played Hertha Ayrton, who I love. Kate Mulgrew, just her voice and her tone and the way she can command a room. And the first line of the play is, there was a technical problem in the world and I fixed it and you're welcome. And I remember grabbing Joe's knee in the seat next to me and just leaning to him and saying, I'm directing this someday. And I put like a Google alert out for Lauren Gunderson and the rights so that the moment it became available, I started mass submitting it into the capital area until someone finally said yes. And so I'm very excited to be the first one in the area to perform this show. And so it goes up the first 3 weekends of December. We're very excited at Albany Civic Theater.
Excellent. 235 2nd Avenue, my home.
Patrick has the address memorized.
477 2749.
Really? The phone number? Wow.
477
But it's less about her discoveries and her Nobel Prizes and more about the women behind the science and how female friendship and that sisterhood can really overcome the darkest of times.
Awesome. Can't wait. Michael.
Laura's got the whole elevator speech going. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer. I always got it ready.
December.
I know. I don't know if I have the elevator speech for my show yet. Okay, so our first production of the season is Michael and Steve Talk About the End of Life as They Knew It. And it is an original, like everything we do, an original production focusing on a social issue. And this social issue is caregiving. And it is a play that juxtaposes two stories. Steve Swartz, who took care of his elderly mom at home for 12 years, and then she went into a nursing home for the last 6 months of her life. And Steve started to do Facebook posts, and I was his Facebook friend. He was posting during the period of time that his mom was in a nursing home, and his posts were touching and funny, and I, on my end, kept reading the posts, thinking, I want to reach out to him because I have this play that I want to do based on something I experienced that I think could be juxtaposed with this, but Steve's mom is dying. So what's the timing for me to send him a message about this? So I just sent him a message saying, I know now is not the time, but I'd love to talk to you about this at some point. So Steve and I met in last January, and decided that we would actually kind of strong-arm Steve into juxtaposing these two stories. So his story of when his mom was in a nursing home, and my story of when my daughter was 4 and 5 years old, and she was in Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh because she was diagnosed with stage 3 liver cancer and then had a liver transplant. And during that time, she was not expected to live. So Steve's story and my story, and then in between those flashbacks, there are scenes of Steve and I getting together, trying to decide how to write this play and whether we can actually do it or not.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an important topic. Caregiving has, I think, entered all of our lives in some form or another. At some point, I know we spent many years with my mother, who suffered from dementia and moved into a home. And, I think I can't wait to see it.
Thank you. It's something that I think doesn't get talked about a whole lot, and that role. And one of the things that I've been saying in interviews the last few weeks is that because caregivers are taking care of someone who's ill or elderly, I think that we're in a position of being secondary characters. And we start to think of ourselves as secondary characters because, of course, we are.
Wow.
We're living in service to someone else and trying to help them either die well or live or whatever it is that's happening. But we're there in service to someone else's story. And so our story often doesn't get told. And it feels a little iffy, maybe a little selfish to center, I'll just talk about me, to center my own story in my daughter's story. So when I was thinking of doing this, my daughter did live, and she's 31, and I went to her and said, I'd like to do this, but I won't do this without your permission. And I want, because she's very private about it, and I said, but I want to make it clear, I understand that I'm not telling your story. I'm telling my story of your story. And those are very different. Her experience was as a little girl. My experience was as the parent who had to make all the decisions during that period of time.
But it's so important, especially if it's a story that's not getting told, because I think a lot of people can relate to it. And isn't that one of the most important things about art, is reaching somebody who maybe doesn't get the spotlight shown on them sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's one of the things that I'm really dedicated to is putting stuff on stage where people can see their own story very directly. So no, my story is probably not the story of people who are going to be in the audience. Steve's story is not the exact story, but that feeling, being a caregiver is very lonely. It's very isolating, and in particular, it felt important to do this play because it's an opportunity to reach people who do feel lonely and isolated in that role, and let them know that they're not alone and that we understand.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great. So the podcast is called The Play That Changed My Life. Laura, you want to?
Yeah, Laura, you go first.
Okay. So the play that changed my life is not a play, nor is it profound. It is almost silly, but when I was very young, I had always seen a lot of the old Broadway things and musicals. My parents and grandparents basically raised me on them, but I had never seen one live. And so one day my grandfather took me, I think I was like 7 or 8, to the local high school for for their production of Cinderella, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. It wasn't a particularly good production that I remember. I remember it not being very good, but as this 7-year-old sitting in the audience and looking up at these people who I passed in the hallway, they're high schoolers, I'm in, elementary school, one big school, K through 12, small towns, yay. I saw these people in the high school every day, but there they were up on stage in gowns and dancing and singing, and they weren't themselves. And my little brain saw that and said, okay, I know the magic things that aren't real that I've been told. The Easter Bunny is not real, Tooth Fairy is not real, those things. But here's the magic real on stage for 2 hours and 15 minutes with intermission. You're telling me that's a thing? People can choose to do that? That's real? The magic can be real to the people who try and can get up there and do that? And it broke my brain. I felt my brain chemistry change. During intermission, my grandfather bought me this button. I just had the glass slipper on it. And I remember holding it and going home with it, and the intrusive thoughts of every song and every line and every costume change, and my little brain starts thinking, well, I would have done it this way, and I wish I could have seen it that way. And for days this went on. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think of anything else other than this play. And you mean that can be real? The magic can be real? And I remember taking this button, like in front of my closet, like an altar, and shoving it in the back and piling on top of it books and toys and dolls, trying to get the voices to quiet and try to get the thought out of my head. If I could just go back to my normal life, and even buried there deep in the closet, it wouldn't, and I still thought about it. And that was it. That was the moment I got bit by the theater bug, and I knew that I had, and I knew that my life would never be, ever be the same after that. And couple years later, I'm enrolled in every ballet, tap, jazz, dance class that my mother could drive me to. And I got into high school and performed in the musicals. And by the junior year, I was student directing them with the high school teachers. And it's just been that way ever since.
That's awesome.
So not incredibly profound, no large play that, I read and it changed my it was a pretty okay-ish high school production of Cinderella.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great story.
It's pretty profound.
Yeah. I love the burying the button.
Yes.
I still have the button. I still have it.
Hoping the voice gets quieter.
Like to go back to normal, because I knew as a kid, it was like, this isn't normal. I shouldn't be thinking of every single, sway of the, but I did. And I was like, why is this just now ingrained in cement in my brain, and I can't get rid of it. I can't go back to just watching cartoons. I'm thinking about Rodgers and Hammerstein that I'm 8. I just knew at that moment. Changed my life.
Awesome.
Well, I have to follow that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I was thinking about it on the way here. There's one of the things about being older is there's a lot of those. There's a lot of those moments, and so I could talk about some of them, but I think, okay, here's a weird one. So, so when I taught for 6 years at New York State Theater Institute, and I taught a class called Production Workshop that when I first started was pretty open to whoever wanted to be in it, and in short order I had it arranged so that people had to audition for it, and they worked with me for 2 semesters instead of 1, and it ended in a production. And initially, I had written plays, but the plays that I wrote tended to be similar to some of the ones that I've done at Creative Action, which were collaborative, and so collaborative writing based on the personal experiences of people in the room, which felt really important with teenagers. But the 3rd year, I sat down and tried to write a narrative play. Me writing a narrative play, and that play was called The Search for Amaranth, and it was a hero's journey kind of story that was based, and characters were created based on who was in the class, and I learned that I could write a narrative play. I knew I could write, but I didn't know I could write a narrative play, a story from beginning to end, with scenes that move the arc along and with character arcs and all of that. And that writing that play is when I started to think of myself as a playwright. And I think now, with creative action, what I've discovered again in the last couple of years is that that's the best writing I do, when I'm writing a narrative play where I know the arc of the story, what the scenes are that move that arc along, where I have a clear sense of the characters, and that's where I feel the most at home. So it wasn't somebody else's play, which feels a little, kind of like it's mine, but it was the process of realizing what I was capable of doing, and that this felt like home to me, and that I knew that I had a talent for it, and I knew how to use it in a way in the community to bring about change, and that was the start of sort of everything that's happened in the ensuing years for me.
That's great. Yeah, fantastic. Thinking about creativity in the time of COVID, just came up with my play that changed my life, and we were talking. I started teaching my class. I used to do it at the Masonic Lodge, which home to Confetti Stage, and that's how I knew that place. And then we moved to Albany Barn because that's the first place I could get into to teach a class in October of 2020. And then as soon as public performances happened, April of 2021, we did a scene night, and I said, hey, I want to do a play. So in June, we did Death Tax. And even though it was a rocky production, I was sort of like, and I turned to this play after I produced Men on Boats with my class a couple of years earlier. We did The Christians by Lucas Nath. And The Christians is about a pastor of a megachurch who decides that he no longer believes in hell, and he preaches that to his congregation, and tries to get them all to go along with him, and through the course of the play, everything is he winds up alone, but spoiler. But this was a crazy play, to think, it was a mega church, and I was going to turn the Albany Barn into a mega church.
Very aptly, too. It really looked, with the high vaulted ceilings and the way that you hung the curtains, and you had the huge cross in the background with the lighting. It really fit right in.
Thank you. Yeah, and the cross was made out of styrofoam.
Styrofoam with backlight from,
Nikki Lights, one of our tech angels, went to Home Depot, I think, like 2-3 days before tech, and bought this chunk of styrofoam and carved a cross out of it and threw different lights on it, and made you believe. And then we had a choir of 14 with Rob Weber.
And using the aisles too in the barn really helped, elongating that into the audience. I really loved that because it really brought it into the full building, not just the stage.
And the barn is very easy to work with. Casey and now Christy there, but has its challenges stage wise. But I really enjoyed adapting that play to that space, and then the projections as well, and using live video. And, this was all kind of making it up as you go along, but finding a way to present this story. And when choosing the play, I responded really strongly to the story, and I love his writing. But as far as how it was going to be done, I was like, I don't know. So, that we came up with what we came up with, I was very happy with. And that was the first Harbinger production. And now, looking back on it, I was like, okay, and that changed my life.
I love that.
That was 10 plays ago. And it's not
Has it
even been
really?
10 it's not even been 2 years.
I was gonna say, I was like, it doesn't feel like it's been that long since the Christians. So
We're
wow.
on our 11th production.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how you're doing that, but congratulations.
Yeah, well, a lot of folks interested.
Lot of
Recruiting a
help.
lot of,
Yes.
looking around the room at the cast last night. And I'm like, I hope they're all happy because, because it was such a great, Gene Carney, Michael Schaefer, Richard Rowe,
Yeah.
Monet Thompson, Sarah Papini, Tiffany McWilliams. I was like, oh my gosh.
Love it.
John Quinnan. Yeah, I'm leaving out someone, but
That's okay. They'll email you later
Yeah.
after they listen
Right.
to the podcast. It'd be like, you didn't say my name.
oh, now you're a guest on the next
There you
podcast.
go.
Right.
That's how you get
I
nominated.
want, yeah. If I left out your name, welcome to the play that changed my life. And tell us more about you. So that was great. Thank you so much.
Of course, thanks for having us.
Thank
for
you.
joining us to the play that changed my life. And I'll see you in a theater really soon.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thanks for joining us. And tune in again for the play that changed my life. Thank you.